What's going on, guys? It's Mario from Wired Workshop, and today we're going to be making a LED handle for Jimmy Diresta's skeleton blade knife. I started off on a piece of scrap wood, so my idea here was to trace it and then cut this out. That way I can get the basic shape for the handle that I wanted in my hands to make sure it felt right. And that way I knew what to 3D model and base it off of. Now, before I drew this, I had a general idea on the amount of space that I needed for all the electronics that fit inside. This, though, was my first handle that I made, and as you can see, I only left 2 slots for finger holes. I think I was a weird alien or was planning for table saw accidents. But after I got it cut out, I got it in my hands, I played with it for a little bit, and was pretty happy, so I picked that design. Alright, so jumping here in Fusion 360, I have the model here that I made for the handle, and it's going to be in 2 parts. So these screws back here are going to be what holds it all together. I go back to this front side, make this disappear. This is where everything is going to work, more or less. So I cut in a spot right here that's going to hold a switch, and from that switch, it's going to power all these LEDs that are going to fit into all these tiny little grooves. And I had laid them out to shine right behind the Diresta logo, so that's why they're all placed in a weird, funky way to try to match that lighting. There's 37, so I hope it diffuses the light properly. I also left a couple little tracks here, which is where the wires are going to be run, and the wires are going to go to these batteries. And I have 2 1.5 batteries that are going to be connected in series, which is going to give me a total of 3 volts. And that's what's going to power all of the LEDs. Alright, so we got both pieces of the handle. I'm going to start by putting these together. That way it's easier to sand. But to do that, I'm going to have to recess those nuts that I left the holes for inside of this. Now, they don't fit right off the bat. So what I'm going to have to do is heat up the nuts with a heat gun and then push them in. That heat's going to melt the plastic so it gets a nice snug fit inside of the model. Alright, the handle's all screwed together. Now I'm going to go ahead and add more of a round over to all the edges on the handle itself. I put a round over inside of Fusion 360 on the model and it came out okay, but I just want a little bit more, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Also, going to sand this down and get it ready for some filler primer. So even though I'm only using a Dremel with a sanding drum in this clip, I actually used a file for basically everywhere on this thing. I thought that was a little bit easier to control, and then I used some sandpaper as well to get into some tighter spots. After that, though, I used some of this glazing spot putty. Now this helps get into the cracks of anything that might have been misprinted just because you use a 3D printer. Not always perfect. I spread some of this around. I waited about 30 minutes for that to set up, and then I sanded that with the rest of the piece. After that, I used some of this filler primer, and this really helps get into those layer lines and fix anything that you might have missed sanding or on the spot putty. I waited about 3 hours for that to set up before I started sanding the primer, and then I moved on to my top coat. Alright, so the handle came out pretty good, I think. The finish of the paint actually was better than I had thought until I went ahead and stabbed 2 holes there, trying to clean out the little spots for the LED. I noticed that on the logo, they were kind of shifted over one way, so I tried to shift them another way, and in doing so, I just jabbed right through the back of the handle, not being careful. So I'm going to go ahead and put the LEDs in there anyway, and then spray paint this before I go to bed. That way it gives some time to set up before I mess with it the following day. The best way I actually found to do this was to use CA glue and activator. So I had went and then squirted the parts I was going to do first with the activator, held the LED in its little spot it was going to be in, and then tacked it down with the CA glue. This gives me an instant bond, and I'm able to let go of that LED right after I put the CA glue on there, basically. I just repeated this about 37 times, and then that was it. You can see, though, that the CA glue did not like the paint on the inside of this thing too well. It makes this look awful at the end, but no one will see this part, so it's fine. I dropped a little switch into its place, and then this is actually a push switch, which I thought worked out really well for this project. And the way this all gets connected is a wire that I strip out, which goes to that switch, but then this side that I roll up, almost like a Cinnabon, gets placed underneath of the battery. So from the battery, it goes to the switch, and that controls that 14 gauge wire that I ran earlier on the negative side. And then there's another rolled up wire that of course goes to the positive side, under this battery here. So you plop in both batteries, and then on the other side of the handle, I put these 2 springs in. Now these two springs are connected to each other, and they also give connection down on the batteries. Good thing about this too is that they don't allow for that wire to come loose from the battery on that other side because of the compression of the spring. So once you put it all together, you flip the switch and the lights turn on. And then I just did a quick double check to make sure all the LEDs were in the right place. Alright, so my resin just came in and I'm using Smoothcast 326. It's actually the same resin that Bill Duran had used from Punished Props. If you guys haven't checked out that video, I would totally check that out. All their stuff is amazing over there. But right now, I'm gonna pour some of that resin into this little mold I have here, and this is gonna check to make sure that the resin is transparent enough after I put this white pigment in. That way, I don't pour that into the blade and then realize it's not what I wanted, because that would be bad. So let's get that going. Alright, so the test is out of the pressure pot. Now the light does shine from behind it and you can see the blue inside of the white. It's not as much as I would like, but I think that's because I put too much pigment in and I also put too much resin in the test that's actually going to be in the knife itself. So I had these little clear cups and I poured some extra resin into there that I had for more of a test. Let that in the pressure pot and then took that out. And I did try some blue thinking I would like that, but overall I'm gonna go with the white just to give it more of a, it almost changed colors when I turned the knife handle on. And I found this one white that is going to be my guy that I'm going to try to match when I mix up the mix that's gonna go inside of the blade. All right, so the resin is done curing. I had a little bit of overpour on the back, which I can go ahead and just trim off with a razor blade and then sand that down, and a little bit of sanding on the front. It looks like I had just a little bit that didn't quite fill in the corner of the R and one of the little spots for the E, but not enough to annoy me, and I can always go back and then just try to fill in that little gap if it bothers me in the future. But other than that, it came out pretty good. You use the Diresta knife to clean the Diresta knife. Summer seems really fitting to use this to scrape off the extra epoxy. It actually works pretty good. With that, the LED handle for Jimmy Diresta's skeleton knife is now complete. I'm super stoked about this thing actually. Having to 3D model this around the knife and trying to fit the batteries and getting a little switch in here, it was all fun and challenging, and kind of the first time I've done something similar to this. I usually don't like working with batteries because I don't like changing the batteries. But this is super cool. This is actually going to sit on my desk once that gets finished. And I'm really happy with it. I will say there's a couple spots that could be improved, like getting the resin in the little gap for the R and E that's left. I could glue this in too, but I like being able to pull this out actually and being able to use it without the handle. And it doesn't want to fall out too. So like I can shake it, it's not going anywhere. So this thing's totally fine. If I want to glue it in later, I have the option. One other thing is that there's a slight dark spot on the S. I could go and then try to cut in another LED and then attach it to the positive and negative wires. I don't think it's worth it though. It doesn't bother me that much, but that's something to try to look out for in a future project. And it's also for me. For somebody else, I'd probably be freaking out a little bit and then go try to fix it. But I'm gonna let it stay the way it is. If I wanted to go a step further, I could have actually made a mold of both parts of the handle and then made that out of more resin to make it more of a sturdier handle instead of it being 3D printed plastic. But it's not like I'm taking this in the woods with me. It's basically just gonna sit on my desk as a showpiece. So, I mean, the whole point of an LED handle is kind of ridiculous in the first place, but I like it. Alright guys, that pretty much wraps it up for this one. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you haven't seen any of Jimmy's Diresta's videos, I totally recommend that. He's one of my biggest inspirations and one of the reasons I even started making YouTube content in the first place. Dude is awesome. Also check out Bill Duran from Punished Props. He also made a handle for Jimmy's knife, and that turned out really well. And he even has a 3D model that you can print out on a 3D printer and put on there yourself. With that being said, I'll see you guys next time.